Hey guys, welcome to another video. Now, the other day someone asked me what I thought about the CLA in general. They weren't specifically asking about the CLA45 AMG, which is what I've got here. They're just asking in general, so what I thought in terms of its looks, functionality, and what it was just like to drive every single day basically. I'd been interested in the CLA probably about 1 year before I actually got hold of this one. So you know, when I first thought about the CLA, I wasn't actually considering a full fat AMG, as it were. So that did mean I did drive some of the other variants, and the 45 isn't for everyone. Depending on your lifestyle, budget, that kind of things, you know, you might be looking at a diesel or maybe even the CLA250. I mean, if you are considering a CLA in the near future, this video is for you. I'm going to try and cover every variant. I've not driven every single variant, but I've driven enough of them, I'd say. So let's start with the diesels. I'm from the UK and diesels are generally very popular here. Now for the CLA, they only offer two variants, the CLA200D and the CLA220D. I've driven the 220D, I've not driven the 200. However, my advice would be to stay clear of the 200D. The reason for that is that both variants have the same engine. One produces 170 horsepower, the 220, and the 200D produces 130. In terms of fuel economy, both will achieve exactly the same numbers. You know, there's no difference in terms of engine. The main difference in power is basically from the 200D being detuned from the 220. Now, the reason for steering clear of the 200 is that when I drove the 220, it does feel a tad gutless in terms of power. The equivalent BMW engine, so you know, their 20D that you'll find in, you know, the 1 Series, 2 Series, 3 Series, etc., produces 10 more horsepower and it just feels nicer to drive. The Merc 220 engine, it's a bit more gruff and sounds a bit like a tractor, if I'm honest. But you know, if you are wanting a diesel, you've only got two options. I'd just say go straight for the 220D, don't bother with the 200. In terms of the interior, it's not too dissimilar from what you'll find in here. You know, in terms of where everything is. So obviously you've got the same size. I think it's a 7-inch display, so you get that across all of the CLAs now. The gear selector isn't down here like on the CLA45, it's all on the steering wheel, and that holds true for all the diesels and the petrol variants up to this car basically. In terms of pricing, in the UK the 200 starts from about, I think it's around 29,000, and the 220D is probably a couple of £1,000 more. Both of them do offer something called the AMG line, and if you're someone that actually cares about having a stylish car and how the car looks, I would seriously recommend just ticking that option. But what you get with that is mainly improved aesthetics. You get the AMG body styling on the outside, the different wheels, the full LED headlamps, tinted rear windows, and it basically just makes it look closer to a CLA45. And the difference between the AMG line and their standard sport line is massive. Like, if you see a completely standard CLA, it actually looks terrible in my opinion. Now, switching over from the diesels to the petrol variants, the very basic one is the CLA180. So that's also the cheapest in the range. I think it starts around 26,000 here in the UK. What's in that is a 1.6 litre petrol. It produces about 120 horsepower, and I have driven the 180 before in a courtesy car as a DB11 drives past, and I really didn't like it. I mean, why you'd go for the 180, I'm not too sure. I suppose it is the cheapest, and if you just want a CLA, then sure thing. But you are seriously better off with one of the diesel options, because it's not fun to drive in any way. I know it's a 1.6, but it feels even less powerful than what it actually is, and more often than not it'll just annoy you. Right, let's move on to the next petrol variant, and this is where it gets interesting. It's the CLA250. If you have a CLA250 yourself, it's probably best to leave the video now because I'm probably going to offend you a little bit. Let's get some facts and figures out of the way. There is a step up in price from the diesels. I think the base price is about 35,000, 36,000, something like that, and you can either get the 250 in a manual, automatic, and also a four-wheel drive version. It shares the exact same engine as the one you find in this CLA45. However, it produces significantly less horsepower, like a surprising amount less. I think it's about just over 200, about 210 horsepower, which is 170 less than the CLA45. And when you take that into consideration, I actually think it's quite expensive for what it is. I mean, some people think of it as like the budget CLA45, but for that kind of money, you're better off with something like an S3 Saloon, which has 300 horsepower, so straight away you're 100 up, and it really is. I think the S3 might be slightly more expensive, but I seriously don't understand why the CLA250 is that expensive to begin with. I mean, this CLA45 isn't cheap. They start at about 44,000. In terms of differences, the CLA250 on the interior, I'd say, is closer to the diesels than the CLA45, than the full fat AMG interior. Straight away in my car, I've got these performance seats, which you won't find in the CLA250. Both cars do have a 7-speed dual clutch transmission. However, the one in the AMG is slightly different. It's their AMG speed shift something or another. In the 250 it's just a standard 7-speed dual clutch. What else is different? You've got small details here and there, all the red accents that you again don't get in the CLA250. Performance exhaust, nope, you don't get that either. When I try and understand the reason for getting a 250, I suppose if you really don't want a diesel and you want a petrol, then you'd probably go for this. And if you didn't have the budget for the full fat AMG, because the only other petrol variant is that 180, which is it's awful. It's just not enjoyable to drive in any way, shape or form. In this day and age, 210 horsepower really isn't a lot. A lot of diesels are kicking out that amount of power, and diesel engines have more torque, so they've got more grunt as well. I'm biased. My advice would be to either try and do your best to get hold of a CLA45, or get one that's slightly used, because every time I get into this, it does feel a little bit special, and you just don't get that with the 250 because it is so similar in terms of the interior to the very box standard CLA. And then finally, if you've been watching my channel for a while now, you know I've talked endlessly about the CLA45, but if you're new here, the CLA45 is a big step up from the 250. It is a hefty step up in price as well, I'd say, almost £10,000, but you get near enough 400 horsepower, four-wheel drive. You still get the same 2-litre engine as you do in the 250, but you get a completely different soundtrack. One thing that you just do not get with the 250 is this. To sum up, if you're someone that does a serious amount of miles, whether it's your commute to work, etc., then the CLA45 probably isn't for you. You're better off with the diesel. Just make sure you avoid that 200D, just go straight for the 220. Then on the other end of the scale, if you want something special, do your best to try and get hold of a CLA45. Doesn't have to be brand new. I'm sure you can get some pretty good deals on ones that are probably a couple of years old, or just avoid the 250 in general and just go for like an S3 Saloon. So So guys, I hope you found that useful. If you are considering a CLA in the future, or if you know someone that is, give this video a thumbs up if you thought it was useful. Comment down below any thoughts you might have on the CLA in general, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys.